Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I know these are certainly apocalyptic type days, aren't they? Let me start with an interview I did with South African radio, that is Markaz Sahaba online radio. I don't know how they got my number, these folks, but it's the current affairs show with Elfas and Kossi. And I gave a pretty clear-eyed perspective on where we stand at the moment with this coronavirus and the global economy. Do have a listen. Macro thoughts: the scramble for dollar funding has helped push the dollar to the highest level in 3 years. And it's a 6-session winning streak. This is from Tracy Alloway, and it is certainly a global grab for liquidity. From stock market records to zero rates, QE and helicopter money in just under a month, tweeted Jonathan Ferro. On the 24th of February, I said a rate cut or even 4 will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers, I said, cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts. This is non-linear and exponential. Today, that was yesterday, the long bonds return was minus 5.91%, the second worst day ever. The worst was last week. The devil decline of minus 6.66% on March 10th. That's Jim Bianco. Note the best day ever was March 6, plus 8.5%. Third best was March 9, plus 6.72%, and the fourth best was March 16, 5.91%. And you can see the price chart, 30-year treasuries are getting destroyed in the last few hours, and it's all about a tsunami of supply. I wrote about the debt markets in September 2016. Now we're all the way in 2020, and I was quoting Hotel California. I said if volatility spikes, positions are going to be reduced en masse, and essentially this enormous spike in volatility is doing precisely that, because risk calculations are calculated off value at risk. And if volatility spikes, the value at risk compensates for that. I was quoting Mirrors on the Ceiling, the pink champagne on ice, and she said, we're all just prisoners here of our own device. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man, we are programmed to receive. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. We live through historic times. Today's 34 basis point increase in the 10-year Treasury yield was the biggest one-day rise since the summer of 1987, John Althers. When the yield started at more than 8%, markets are excited by the prospect of stimulus, and none of us have seen the likes of this before. As I said, world economists and policymakers are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of the COVID-19. I wrote a few weeks ago, when everyone was talking about a V-shaped recovery, that it was a fantasy. Fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China have been dashed. In fact, China cannot just crank up the factory because they will risk a second round effect of infections. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. Gold volatility spiked to a multi-year high. This is from JS Blockland. We rebounded. We're currently at 1515, and what I am sure is we're going to be at 2,000 plus at the end of the year. The question is the journey to that point. Home thoughts. Rest in peace, Italy. Elias Schelg. And it's really the visual sometimes, you look at charts, you look at the exponential nature of them, and you forget that this is real people. And that really caught my attention. And then Boris Johnson, in a jaw-dropping claim last night, joked with business leaders that the effort to build more ventilators could be called Operation Last Gasp. Albert Camus, I have no idea what's awaiting me or what will happen when this all ends. For the moment I know this, there are sick people and they need curing. Albert Camus, The Plague. Akin Bodhi, Akin B, street photography from major metropolises in Africa. This is via the Washington Post. There's some beautiful photographs. Do have a look. This is one, and here is another, which I found via Morgan Batter. Beautiful, very street type photography. Reminded me of the 70s in sort of Harlem, those sorts of photographs. An urgent meeting was called in the morning. No worries there, so only social bonding. Parveen Kaswan. Elephants travel to mourn the dead in faraway herds. The Times. The natural death of a 55-year-old elephant called Victoria in a national park in Kenya, surrounded by her family, has helped to provide researchers with a unique insight into how the animals respond to loss, including a prolonged interest in the deceased, even as the body decays. Among the last to leave was her 10-year-old daughter, who was observed by scientists to have temporal glands streaming with liquid, a reaction linked to stress. Witnessing elephants interact with their dead sends chills up one's spine, as the behavior so clearly indicates advanced feelings, said George Wittemir from Save the Elephants. Some of those making the journey to Victoria's corpse would have been familiar with the scent of the matriarch, but many more would have been strangers. If this had been a wake, it would have been well attended, said Shifra Goldenberg from the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, who observed and filmed the elephants attending the body in 2013. Although the latest research stopped short of describing the elephant's response as a mourning emotion, Dr. Chase said that he identified it as such. I'm often at the carcass of a poached elephant, and there will be live elephants nearby demonstrating typical behavior, which strongly implies to me they're mourning. In fact, I've seen this myself on a fantastic documentary called The Elephants of Kilimanjaro. Watch that. I've actually seen it in a game park. In fact, they get very upset and destroy all the habitation around. It's really the most remarkable thing to see in person, frankly. We had a late evening encounter with elephants at Mazima Springs, Savo West. Hannah and I were on foot, and then it was early evening, and suddenly this enormous herd passes in front of us. Do have a watch of that footage. It's about 8 minutes. And a bit shorter if time is of the essence. Some elephants we saw in the Savo, and look at that gigantic bull elephant that comes from behind. Political reflections, there are probably 25 to 50 people who have the virus for every one confirmed. Dr. Marty McCarry, Johns Hopkins University, and that's what I feel, and I've been saying it for a while, and I think some people took offense that I've been too bearish, but I mean, it is what it is, and mathematics is also what it is. You can't spin mathematics or death. So therefore, you've got a multiple on these numbers of 25 to 50. And that's why Thomas Puyo, in that excellent article, Coronavirus, Why You Must Act Now, the coronavirus is coming to you. It's coming at an exponential speed gradually and then suddenly. It's a matter of days, maybe a week or two. Zorina Q, over 12,000 new cases of COVID-19 were reported in a single day. Today, exponential growth is continuing unabated. Cases multiply by 10 every 14 days. We are at nearly 100,000 cases outside China. Jody Graphics, daily new deaths in China and the rest of the world. You know, the Chinese numbers don't make sense. I know they took very dramatic action, but prior to taking that dramatic action, the numbers do not stack up. As I said, the viral moment has arrived. This is Remy GMI, who has some very beautiful charts as well. The world's COVID-19 growth is now consistently above 10,000 per day. I was writing about the origin of the coronavirus, which has become subject to a geopolitical rat-a-tat crossfire between US and China. And my views are in this article, The Origin of the Coronavirus. And I quoted Don DeLillo, "There's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us." And then picked up on a tweet from Scott Burke, 777. What are the odds that a SARS-like coronavirus with overlapping genetics from HIV mutated and crossed over into humans next door to a laboratory which had been enhancing coronavirus with HIV for over a decade? And conversely, what are the odds it leaked out of the laboratory? China is upset with Mario Vargas Llosa for saying the coronavirus originated there. In an ongoing campaign to spin the global narrative over the origins of the novel coronavirus, China is leaving no stone unturned. Its latest target, Peruvian author Mario Vargas Llosa, who I like a lot. The Chinese embassy in Lima published an announcement blasting the Nobel laureate for his irresponsible comments he made with regards to China and the coronavirus outbreak. He published an article in the Spanish newspaper El País, stated that the virus had originated in China and that because of the epidemic, society is showing signs of returning to the Middle Ages when people lived in fear of the plague. This would not be happening, Vargas Llosa wrote, were it not for China's undemocratic political system, highlighting the fact that doctors who tried to blow the whistle at the start of the outbreak were silenced, and time that could have been used to develop a vaccine was thereby lost. He said such actions were the hallmark of dictatorships and compared the sequence of events in China to that of the Chernobyl disaster, a comparison that many in China began making in the early days of the epidemic. The article, the link for it, Regreso al Medioevo, Mario Vargas Llosa, is linked on Rich Wrap-Ups. I won't read it in Spanish because my Spanish is not very good. The plague has been throughout history one of humanity's worst nightmares, especially in the Middle Ages. It was what made our old ancestors desperate and crazy. Locked behind the sturdy walls they had erected for their cities, defended by moats filled with poisoned waters and drawbridges, they were not so much afraid of those tangible enemies against whom they could defend themselves as equal, face them with swords, knives, and spears. But the plague was not human. It was the work of demons, a punishment from God that fell on the mass of the citizenry and hit sinners and innocents alike, against whom there was nothing to do except pray and repent for the sins committed. Death was their almighty, and after it, the eternal flames of hell. Irrationality exploded everywhere, and there were cities that tried to appease the infernal plague by offering human sacrifices, witches, sorcerers, unbelievers, unrepentant sinners, rebels and rebels. When Flaubert traveled to Egypt, he still saw lepers roaming the streets, ringing bells to warn people to step aside if they did not want to see and catch their purulent sores. And then, so sticking with that point, then Pepe Escobar's written an article, China locked in hybrid war with the United States. Among the myriad earth-shattering geopolitical effects of coronavirus, one is already graphically evident. China has repositioned itself for the first time since the start of Deng Xiaoping's reforms in 1978. Beijing openly regards the US as a threat, as stated a month ago by Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the Munich Security Conference during the peak of the fight against coronavirus. Beijing is carefully, incrementally shaping the narrative that from the beginning of the coronavirus attack, the leadership knew it was under a hybrid war attack. Xi's terminology is a major clue. He said on the record that this was war, and as a counterattack, a people's war had to be launched. He described the virus as a demon or a devil. Xi is a Confucianist. Unlike some other ancient Chinese thinkers, Confucius was loath to discuss supernatural forces and judgment in the afterlife. However, in a Chinese cultural context, devil means white devils or foreign devils, Guaylo in Mandarin, Guaylo in Cantonese. This was Xi delivering a powerful statement in code. When Zhao Lijian, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, voiced in an incandescent tweet the possibility that it might be the US Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan, the first blast to this effect to come from a top official, Beijing was sending up a trial balloon signaling that the gloves were finally off. Zhao Lijian made a direct connection with the military games in Wuhan in October 2019, which included a delegation of 300 US military. Explosive conclusion is that COVID-19 was already in effect in the US before being identified in Wuhan due to the by now fully documented inability of the US to test and verify differences compared with the flu. Adding all that to the fact that coronavirus genome variations in Iran and Italy was sequenced, and it was revealed that they did not belong to the variety that infected Wuhan. Chinese media now openly asking questions and drawing a connection with the shutting down in August last year of the unsafe military bioweapon lab at Fort Detrick, the military games and the Wuhan epidemic. Extra questions linger about the opaque event 201 in New York on October 18, 2019, a rehearsal for a worldwide pandemic. caused by a deadly virus which happened to be coronavirus. This magnificent coincidence happened 1 month before the outbreak in Wuhan. Event 201 was sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the CIA, Bloomberg, Johns Hopkins, and the UN. The World Military Games opened in Wuhan on the exact same day. Irrespective of its origin, which is still not conclusively established, as much as Trump tweets about the Chinese virus, COVID-19 already poses immensely serious questions about biopolitics and bioterror. The working hypothesis of coronavirus is a very powerful but not Armageddon-provoking bioweapon, unveils it as a perfect vehicle for widespread social control on a global scale. Then he's talking about Cuba's rise as a biotech power, a Sun Tzu move on Riyadh, whose end result was a much cheaper barrel of oil. He's talking about the strategic partnership between Russia and China. The chessboard is changing at breakneck speed. Once Beijing identified coronavirus as a bioweapon attack, the People's War was launched with the full force of the state. Now we're entering a new stage which will be used by Beijing to substantially recalibrate the interaction with the West, and under very different frameworks when it comes to the US and the EU. Talking about soft power, sending a hefty humanitarian package to Italy and Iran. Joint venture in China is producing an inhalable version of the antiviral Heberon. And then talking about a social engineering PSYOP. Key lessons to be learned from South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. Doom and gloom count on Italy to offer us T-Polo-style shades of light. Italy chose the Wuhan option with immensely serious consequences for its already fragile economy. Not to mention the poetic justice of the actual Saint Corona, crown in Latin, being buried in the city of Anzio since the 9th century. Saint Corona was a Christian killed under Marcus Aurelius in 165 AD. And has been for centuries one of the patron saints of pandemics. Not even trillions of dollars raining from the sky by an act of divine fed mercy were able to cure COVID-19. G7 leaders had to resort to a video conference to realize how clueless they are, even as China's fight against coronavirus gave the West a head start of several weeks. And really, from a geopolitical perspective, to have ignored that head start was criminal negligence, in my view. Goldman Sachs told no fewer than 1,500 corporations that there was no systemic risk. That was false. New York banking sources told me the truth. Systemic risk became way more severe in 2020 than in 1979, 1987, or 2008 because of the hugely heightened danger of the 1.5 quadrillion derivative market could collapse. Potential unlimited expansion of credit to prevent a derivative implosion stemming from a total commodity and stock market collapse of all stocks around the world. The ghost of a derivative implosion, in this case not caused by the previous possibility, the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz, remains. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. This may be just a coincidence, or this may be, as some are boldly arguing, part of a possible massive PSYOP creating the perfect geopolitical and social engineering environment for full-spectrum dominance. Additionally, along the hard slog down the road with immense inbuilt human and economic sacrifice, with or without a reboot of the world system, a more pressing question remains. Will imperial elites still choose to keep waging full-spectrum dominance hybrid war against China? So I wrote about the origins of this coronavirus in an article on the 1st of March. I do urge you to read it, and in that I quoted William Burroughs, paranoid as someone who knows a little of what's going on. Clearly there was an HIV insert into this virus, which has made it much more virulent. I'm still exploring exactly what's happened. I'm going to write a book about it. 16th of February, I said viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. I keep getting people asking me if the coronavirus can be spread through sexual contact, even if there is no exchange of air or touching of faces. If you can get this accomplished from 6 feet away, congratulations to both of you, Susanna L. Harris. Dr. Dina Grayson, Trump is going to find is that you can't spin death. While Europe is at the epicenter of COVID-19 growth, because US growth keeps following Italy's track, we expect the US to become a significant focus of activity very soon, Remy GMI. If growth in the US remains consistent with the last 5 days, we can expect the number of confirmed cases to cross the 10,000 mark within a week. As I said, I believe it will be a Trump virucide. He is already behind the curve, and the curve is parabolic and exponential and non-linear, and therefore I think it's over, and PredictIt also seem to think it is. The virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. Palagis. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, fully decentralized. And that's why I said a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. Let's move on to currency markets. Euro, dollar, 1,003, dollar index 99.40, Japanese yen 107.22, dollars making a move again, Swiss franc 0.9587, the pound 120.67, the Aussie 0.5985, India rupee 74.275, South Korean won 1247.265, Brazilian real over 5.501, Egyptian pound 15.75, South African rand also at a multi-year low 16.6798. Euro dollar, this chart is from Rich Economics, last trading at 110.04. Look at this as Boeing. This was taken in the trading session yesterday via Tommy Thornton. And this collapse in the share price of Boeing is all about a situation where we're moving from hyper-connectedness, airlines, tourism, etc., to quarantine. Commodity markets, gold all over the place, 1504 last. Crude oil dumping $26.77. It's just unbelievable, the collapse. Spreads on dollar-denominated emerging market bonds have surged to the highest level since 2009. Lisa Abramovitz, February 2018. I was writing about the end of Halcyon days. Halcyon days became known as days when storms do not occur. And that is the end of that. From Latin Alcyone, daughter of Julius and the wife of Sikhs. When her husband died in a shipwreck, Alcyone threw herself into the sea, whereupon the gods transformed them both into halcyon birds, kingfishers. When Alcyone made her nest on the beach, waves threatened to destroy it. Julius restrained his winds and kept them calm during 7 days in each year so she could lay her eggs. These became known as halcyon days when storms do not occur. Today the term is used to denote a past period that is being remembered for being happy or successful. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Africa has skyrocketed from 15 to nearly 500 in the past 2 weeks. This chart from Jeffrey York shows the surge. If you're interested in a more updated chart, look at e-tracking map, and that link is also on the website. I wrote specifically about Africa and the coronavirus and the R word, and I said at that time there was considerable skepticism if the virus was going to reach our shores. And I said the first issue is whether the coronavirus will infect the continent. We know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. I said, what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world? Nothing, nothing, nothing. And we were in that phase of nothing, nothing, nothing. Now we're in the cluster, cluster, cluster phase, and we're a few short days away from the boom. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. South Africa has only about 1,000 intensive unit care beds in both public and private hospitals for a population of 57 million. Nigeria, with 200 million, is estimated to have far fewer. A succession of African governments have announced school closures, bans on social gatherings and travel restrictions, but the horse has bolted. As I said on the 24th of February, we are past the point of no return, in my opinion. COVID 2019 in Wuhan went from an index case in November 2019 to several thousand cases by mid-January 2020, thus going from an initial seeding event to widespread transmission in the span of 10 weeks. We believe that international seeding events started to occur in mid-January. Thus, we have a critical 10 weeks from then to late March to contain these nascent outbreaks before they become sizable, and clearly they're becoming sizable now. South Africa now has 85 confirmed cases of COVID-19. This means there's been an increase of 23 from yesterday's announcement. Italian ambassador to Burkina Faso tells me has tested positive for coronavirus. He's not been to Italy since November. He insists he caught the virus here in Burkina Faso, which is more evidence that local transmission is beginning in some parts of Africa, also happening in Egypt and South Africa. That's Jeffrey York. As I said, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. I expressed my extreme concerns in a radio interview some weeks ago about coronavirus making landfall with Bruce Whitfield of Radio 702. Ethiopia has up to 10 laboratories capable of testing for coronavirus, the official said. The number of tests we have is very disappointing. It's maybe 40 or 50. That's ridiculous. There are only 200 intensive care units in the capital, Addis Ababa. I can't believe that either. So Addis, I think, also has been a petri dish. I think they've been playing fast and loose, exporting people all over Africa on Fly Ethiopian. And we're going to see plenty of cases. I just don't think they've tested anyone. They've tested 50 people and had 5 cases. Nothing, 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 cluster, 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 and then boom. As I said, on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. Technical difficulties encountered with the call center 8335 have now been resolved. In addition, we now have made the line 952 open for service. That's the Minister of Health in Ethiopia. Bole is the epicenter of hyperconnectedness and China-Africa connectedness. My article in Africa Report, Debt, Virus and Locusts Create a Perfect Storm. In that article, I was predicting a Nigerian devaluation, a collapse in the South African rand, a blowout in Eurobond yields, and that fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China would be dashed. I named some countries which I thought were at risk. Goldman Sachs says it would take an exchange rate of 600 naira per dollar for Nigeria to generate a healthy current account surplus with today's oil prices. It might only be a matter of time before it has to give up. Its foreign reserves have fallen by 20% since July to $36.1 billion. And the Naira is the most overvalued of the major oil currencies. Angola is also at risk because crude accounts for almost all its exports. Country's foreign exchange shortages triggered by the 2014 crash never completely went away, and last month the Kwanza was trading almost 20% weaker than its official price on the streets of Luanda. This is a phenomenon I called in some part the China Emerging Markets Frontier Feedback Loop phenomenon, and I said the fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany, that the rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon, and I said this pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. 1 month implied volatility for the rand versus the dollar climbed to the highest in more than 8 years. A rush by worried South African shoppers to stock up on food and vital supplies spurred sharp gains. In Johannesburg, retail stock Shoprite up 13%, Pick n Pay 11%, Woolworths 7.1%. South African All Shares down 27.16% so far this year. Dollar rand last time I looked 16.68, but the rand's going weaker. EGX 30 down 34.09%. Nigerian All Share down 16.02%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 2.81%. Flowers being dumped in Holland, given that Kenya is a leading flower producer. Expect chaos in the sector. Already it is very gloomy, not a good sign. US trade chief tells Congress of plans for trade deal with Kenya. Informed Congress of plans to negotiate a comprehensive trade agreement with the African country of Kenya and pledged to follow a process that requires ongoing consultations with US lawmakers. Lighthizer said the Trump administration intended to follow procedures set out under a 2015 law, often referred to as Trade Promotion Authority. Two-way goods trade between the US and Kenya totaled $1.1 billion in 2019. Kenya shilling at 103.75. Nairobi All Share down 19.75% year-to-date. NSE20 down 22.66% year-to-date. Thank you for listening.